Russell Brand, The Conclusion. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We have looked at a lot of evidence from a variety of different sources, newspapers, interviews, video footage, and information from Brand himself, his answers in interviews, his own autobiography, extensive sections of which I have read. There's a lot more evidence that one could have referred to, but ultimately it becomes repetitive, simply reinforcing existing points, and therefore it's unnecessary to include it. All of this is being done not to assassinate in any form Russell Brand, but merely make a determination as to what he is, and therefore you can decide for yourselves whether you believe that he's a good or a bad person, or whatever it is that your own personal moral code applies. For my part, I'm here to make a determination as to what he is, as per my characterizations. And the starting point for that is to consider whether this person is a normal, or an empath, or a narcissistic person but not a narcissist, or a narcissist. Or is there something else at play? For the purposes of helping people understand about narcissism and psychopathy, I divide people up into 4 base characterizations, namely normal, empath, narcissistic, or narcissist, which all have some similarities and some significant differences. Those categories can also have other conditions on top of them. From this, it enables people to understand what a person is, to then interpret their behaviours, and to see their behaviours through a particular prism. Let us begin by considering whether Russell Brand is a normal. What is a normal? Well, they are the largest grouping on the planet, and these individuals have both empathic and narcissistic traits, but they're not especially strong in either. Furthermore, they do have emotional empathy, and they have considerable amounts of emotional empathy, but they do so for a small group of people, their family, some friends, neighbours, colleagues, not for wider humanity as a whole. These individuals can be manipulative, but invariably are not. And I often refer to the normals as the nose-down normals. They're simply trying to get through life. They will exhibit some selfishness because they are trying to focus on paying the bills, bringing up their children, doing a job, etc. And they're not necessarily that bothered about making an impact on the wider world. That's the grouping of a normal. Is this something that Russell Brand fits in? The short answer is no. The reason for this is that he has clear issues with regard to the presentation of emotional empathy that would not fit with somebody who is a normal, and his levels of manipulative behaviour and narcissistic traits are far too strong for a normal. Therefore, we discount that. Our next grouping is that of the empath. Empaths have substantial emotional empathy, and they have so for a wide range of people, not only their immediate circle, but people outside of it also. Empaths are not saints. Empaths can commit rather problematic behaviours, but it's rare that they do so, and it's as a consequence of the diminution of their emotional empathy that this occurs, bringing their narcissistic traits to the fore. More usually, they're governed by this emotional empathy in what they do, like an invisible force, an instinctive guiding force which causes them to behave in a particular way. Empathic people have a range of both empathic and narcissistic traits, but the empathic traits outweigh the narcissistic ones, usually keeping them in check unless there's a diminution in that emotional empathy. Some empathic people can have particularly strong narcissistic traits, but then their empathic traits would be even stronger than those narcissistic ones. For Russell Brand, again, it's evident that he has particularly strong narcissistic traits, but there is an absence of empathic traits alongside them. Furthermore, there are issues with regard to emotional empathy as evidenced by his behaviour towards a range of people, with the resultant effect that he is not an empath. What about narcissistic, but not a narcissist? Such an individual is often found within the fields of entertainment, where they have limited emotional empathy which occasionally makes appearance, but for the most part, causes individuals to behave in a self-centered and selfish fashion. If you'd like to understand more about the differences and similarities, you can watch my video, Narcissistic versus Narcissist, and also obtain from the Knowledge Vault, Understanding Emotional Empathy, the differences between normal, empath, narcissistic, and narcissist. With regard to the suggestion that Russell Brand is narcissistic, well, a narcissistic individual has very high narcissistic traits and a sprinkling of very low empathic ones. You may think this is applicable to Brand because he does appear in some instances to issue what appears to be caring behaviour towards others. However, ultimately, there is some emotional empathy with such an individual, and that appears to be absent again with Russell Brand as a consequence of his behaviours. And therefore, he doesn't have that sprinkling of empathic traits nor limited emotional empathy that would fit with narcissistic. By deduction, this means that of the 4 base categorizations, we're left with narcissist. Now, in making this determination, through the various parts of the evidence that I've narrated to you, I did include the allegations that have been made against him for the sake of completion. But they are simply allegations. And what I have done in my final determination to assess what he is that I have decided to exclude the allegations from the various women that allege sexual misconduct on his behalf. Not because the evidence has no probity or veracity, but rather to demonstrate that this information actually isn't needed. It's seen as contentious with regard to these allegations by many, given the timing of them and the fact that Brand is seen to speak out as against the establishment. In order to cater for that, what I have done in this analysis is make reference to them because they cannot be ignored. But when I have done my final assessment, I actually have not included them. And instead, I've relied on all of the other evidence that exists that supports the fact that he's a narcissist. The fact is that in order for him to be a narcissist, he would need a genetic predisposition towards narcissism allied with a lack of control environment. We see that in his father. It's evident from the way that his father conducted himself, the fact that he cheated on his mother, the fact that he left Russell as a child, and the behaviours that he's exhibited since. For instance, purchasing time with a prostitute for his son whilst he was using two himself, the comments that were made in the boxing video, all demonstrate that this is a man who has no emotional empathy, and therefore his genetic predisposition towards narcissism would have been passed on to Russell. That doesn't mean that he's automatically going to become a narcissist, but it does present the possibility. We also need a lack of control environment. That was clearly the case. His environment was one whereby he had no male role model, his father was in and out of his life, his mother struggled financially to bring him up as a single parent, had issues with cancer, and it was also evident that he suffered some form of sexual abuse from a tutor, and therefore in the circumstances there were various ingredients which would be seen to create a lack of control environment for Russell Brand as a small boy. Accordingly, given the presence of his father as a narcissist and a lack of control environment, we have the two aspects that are required for the creation of a narcissist. Even with that, that doesn't always mean that someone will become a narcissist. The genetic predisposition can skip, or the lack of control environment can be reduced as a consequence of an intervener. Nevertheless, I do not see that there has been an intervener here, and the presumption is that the genetic predisposition and lack of control environment have combined to create a narcissist in Russell Brand. What about the behaviours that support the fact that he is one? Well, he shows a rampant sense of entitlement. He would regularly badger people to get his own way, pressing upon them, wearing them down, trying to charm them, talking at them again and again and again. He's had numerous swift sexual encounters, which shows a sense of entitlement. He orders people around. He expects an immediate response from people. In many instances, he's wanted sex on demand, and he's a hugely self-absorbed individual. This was evidenced during the addiction years, but post them also. He feels that the world needs to hear about what he has to tell you as a thought leader. He utilizes the fact that he's been in therapy as a means to continue to manipulate people. More about that later. He lacks accountability for his behavior. Do not be taken in by the appearance that he's taken accountability by attending a counsellor. He simply uses that as a means to continue to manipulate. Although he has ditched the drink and the drugs, that is just one manifestation of his narcissism, which essentially decided we didn't need to continue to cause you to use drink and drugs. We didn't need to continue to cause you to be this flamboyant vaudevillian figure any longer. Instead, you can present yourself as a wellness guru who has conquered those demons and kept them in check, and utilized that for the purposes of manipulation. And thus, although it would appear that he has taken accountability for those problems, in actual fact, they've just shapeshifted into something else. Hitherto, of course, he had issues with drink and drugs. He doesn't offer any real domestic help. That was clear from the interview that was given when he talked about his domestic setup and his wife and his children. He doesn't provide any real definition to his relationships, and hitherto, of course, that has been completely missing. He doesn't provide meaningful emotional support. His conversations are superficial in nature. He's evidently of intelligence and widely read, but it can be seen that when he debates, it's simply a word salad that's thrown in the direction of the person that he's talking to in order to batter them into submission as a consequence of him having swallowed a thesaurus. There is evidently a parental abrogation of responsibilities and duties, something that he not only admits to, but doesn't seem to think that there's something wrong with it. He exhibits considerable grandiosity. He engages in showmanship. The nature of that showmanship has shifted from being, as I say, that sort of pantomime character, now moving into wellness guru, but both are forms of showmanship. He thinks he's far better than he actually is. He utilizes flowery language. He exhibits financial largesse by giving away money. He's prone to exaggeration. He's vain. He engages in monologues. He dominates conversations. He thinks he's cleverer than he actually is. He demonstrates magical thinking. He presents himself as almost a messiah-like character. He believes himself to be some kind of thought leader. The comments that he makes with regard to his daughters demonstrates that he has a peculiar view of them. He exhibits haughty behaviours. He's dismissive of people. He holds court regularly. His is the voice that should be listened to. He's arrogant. He doesn't look up to anybody other than himself. He believes he's always right in what he has to say. He's a poor listener. If you observe him on a programme or debating, he doesn't listen to what other people say. He is just set to send rather than receive. He is obnoxious at times also. He shows an array of extensive manipulative behaviours, showing flattery, the telling of lies, future faking, triangulation with object, triangulation with person, backhanded compliments, pity play, smearing, promised gain, false compassion, false contrition, invalidation, belittlement, withdrawal, denial, guilt, provocation, projection, blame-shifting, word salad, use of threat, fury, shouting, alienation, argumentativeness, intimidation, deflection, isolation, hijacking of conversations, circular conversations, bringing up the past. He has no boundary recognition. He engages in incessant badgering of people. He's flirtatious to an extensive degree. He's overly tactile. He is prying. He engages in inappropriate communications with people. He talks over people. He interrupts. He's a self-inviter. He does not respect privacy. He repeatedly would transgress the professional and work boundary. He takes over space. He shows substantial aspects of the narcissistic dynamic, namely monopolization of time, mirroring, familial discord, treating others as an extension of self, character trait acquisition, black and white thinking, the exhibition of the need to assert control, the exhibition of a response to a perceived threat to that control, hypocrisy, the exhibition of envy, objectification, Think about how he referred to the young 16-year-old as the child in that particular allegation. But in other instances, he would regularly objectify people in the way that he would treat them. Compartmentalization, paranoia, hoovering, use of the seductive stare, virtual fuel matrix, use of a hunting ground, many intimate relationships, seamless intimate partner primary sources, competitiveness, lack of emotional effect, love bombing, use of a pet name, conspiracy theorist, superficiality. Finally, there is an absence of emotional empathy, which is demonstrated by the commission of infidelities, the treatment of his children, his manipulative behaviours, the fact that he's not a hands-on father and freely admits to it, the meanness that he exhibited, for instance, towards other people at school, the treatment of people during his career, whereby he has belittled and invalidated them, often doing so in public, the treatment of Topsy the dog. And therefore, as a consequence of him having an immense sense of entitlement, there being significant evidence of a lack of accountability, overwhelming evidence of grandiosity, evidence of magical thinking, significant evidence of haughty behaviour, overwhelming manipulative behaviour, absence of boundary recognition, substantial aspects of the narcissistic dynamic, and an absence of emotional empathy, Russell Brand is indeed a narcissist. You might also wonder, are there some antisocial elements about him? Well, with regard to antisocial personality disorder, he's certainly not somebody that accords with social norms. He's regularly engaged in behaviours which might merit arrest. For instance, the fact that he once stripped naked as part of a protest, the fact that he has engaged in behaviours where he has harassed individuals. He has shown impulsivity as well, although that has been somewhat reduced as of late, and I think the impulsivity was more linked to drug taking. He shows an absence of remorse. It's worthwhile pointing out that the assessment that I undertook, that I've just described, to find him as a narcissist was done excluding the allegations of sexual misconduct, rape, sexual assault that have recently come out. If we were to include those, they would simply reinforce what is already there. But to find that he is a narcissist, we don't actually have to include those allegations. There are some traits which are antisocial. They're not extensive. Furthermore, with regard to the finding of antisocial personality disorder, it would be necessary to have a pervasive pattern and disregard for and the violation of the rights of others, something which he's engaged in, and he does demonstrate a failure to conform to social norms, some degree of impulsivity, although that has faded, and a lack of remorse. The major difficulty with a full finding of that is that he wouldn't have exhibited conduct disorder when he was a child. He wouldn't, for instance, repeatedly get into fights at school. He wouldn't engage in lots of criminal behaviour. He did show aggression to an animal, but there's no reports of the destruction of property. He wasn't routinely engaging in theft. There wasn't serious rule violations as a child, and therefore the absence of conduct disorder would take away from him being found to have antisocial personality disorder. What I would say is that he has traits of that. Accordingly, based upon all of the information without the sexual misconduct allegations, it's evident that Russell Brand is a narcissist with antisocial traits. If you were to include the recent allegations of sexual misconduct, that simply reaffirms the finding. This has been a detailed examination, taking a considerable amount of time, and if you'd like to show your gratitude for the hard work of the Ultra, please do feel free to utilise the super thanks, which you will find on your screen. Next, we will be addressing the interesting aspect of what is his school and cadre, now that we've ascertained that he is a narcissist.